Welcome to the Mystical Mermaid Lounge podcast, a space where all spiritual seekers are honored and celebrated. This podcast was born from the journeys of your hosts, who have each faced her own dark night of the soul, but they've emerged with an unshakable belief in divine connection, cosmic inspiration, and her true life's calling. Join us on a journey of personal growth, transformation, and magical self-discovery. Your first co-host is Chloe Brown, a gifted intuitive empath and shadow work life coach. Your second co-host is Keone Starr, an intuitive energy worker and acclaimed past life regressionist. The Mystical Mermaid Lounge podcast starts now. Today we are welcoming Ness, who is a non-binary, neurodivergent, queer, polyamorous human with a chaotic amount of passions, humans, and animals in their life. They are professional harpist who enjoys freelance playing as well as teaching the harp. In addition to music, they also teach yoga. Sprinkling in another passion is birth work as a birth doula and space holder for queer and trans birthing parents. They also do various activist and advocacy work from queer and trans rights to abolition to youth liberation. Because that isn't enough to keep them busy, they are surrounded by love in the form of 2 life partners and co-parents to 3 feral humans, 2 dogs, and a cat. Working their magic in when they can, they are a witch, psychic medium, and budding rune reader. Thank you so much, Ness, for joining us today. We are super excited to talk with you, and I've gotten a chance to know you personally, and I can just speak to just the beautiful soul that you have and just the love that you emit everywhere you go. I'm just personally very grateful and honored that you're here with us today.
Thank you.
We have
We
have a couple of questions for you to get this thing started. And I really found your background being raised in the Midwest. You were in the Christian breadbasket, if you were, a little bit of breadbasket, a little bit of tightening Bible belt. And we know that that area of the country tends to be a little bit more conservative with regard to everything, politics, religion, and all kinds of good stuff. And I understand that you've always known that you've had some sort of psychic and mediumship abilities. So I'm wondering if you could tell us about that, when you became aware, and then how that kind of jived with where you grew up.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. I feel like I could talk a lot just on that alone. Yeah, so I grew up in Wisconsin, was raised Christian. I like to say I was raised by the typical, like, white, in quotations, liberal Christian mindset that was still harmful in almost a very subtle way that has taken a lot of time to extract, both spiritually as well as my queerness too, and understanding and embracing all of that, because I think they're really intertwined in many ways. I think it was filtered in as being super connected to the Holy Spirit as a child. And so that was really celebrated, but seen as a gift that I had that was outside of myself instead of inside myself and embracing it. So things like, oh, you're so good at prayer and all this, and you can connect with all of these things that do end up manifesting or whatnot, but not seeing it as something that I had the ability that came out of me, that it was like something totally separate. So I also didn't have the words, but I knew from a young age that I had these abilities. I assumed everybody did because I was young. So It really started when my great aunt, who I was very close with, she helped my grandmother raise my dad and my aunt when my grandfather passed very suddenly, leaving her with two young children. And so my great aunt was really like another grandmother to me. And she was towards the end of her life. Let's say I was 12 at the time. And I had this feeling that it was coming to the end. And I knew before my parents even came to talk with me that she had passed or she was about to pass. And I just assumed everybody knew that. I knew like that night was going to be the last night that she was with us. And so I just assumed, and I felt her near afterwards. I would feel her near, and she would send robins as her way of communicating with me because she would feed robins in her backyard. And so anytime I see robins, I really connect with her, including she sent a robin egg when I was pregnant with my second child the day before she was born. And so I knew that was going to be a birthday. So just little coincidences, as some might say, but feels more than coincidence to me. And then something similar later on in life happened as well with my grandmother, who I was also close with. When she passed, I was the last one to speak with her, and I didn't want to hang up the phone. I played harp for her over the phone. I knew I said, "Oh, I'll call you tomorrow and play some more of your favorite pieces." And I knew that wouldn't be. And about 5 minutes after I had hung up the phone with her, my mom called me to let me know. And she shows up with cardinals for me. And I've had instances of that throughout my life and into adulthood as well. Neighbors of ours, other people. And I just assumed that people could feel that too, that that was just a general thing. And so it wasn't really up until, gosh, about 6 months or so, because I would just keep this information to myself. And I was speaking with my partner, Bex, and I was sharing all of this stuff with her that was coming through about a bunch of her ancestors, and for like an hour. And it was just like a conversation we were having, and she was crying. It was super affirming. And by the end of it was when she looked at me and she said, "You just gave me a whole medium session. Did you realize that?" And everything was spot on. And so that's when I really recognized, oh, I do have this ability, and started to actively recognize it as such and really tap into it more. So I'm still learning along the way. But that, I feel like I ended up wandering all over the place with that question, but hopefully that answered a lot of it.
Yes. Well, I am Chloe. Thank you so much for being here. I loved hearing that. I actually had a couple of questions come up from that if you're okay with that.
Yeah.
When you had this knowing of, I mean, I guess perhaps that's part of the question. How did you know if somebody was going to pass away? And the second part of that question is going to be, did you ever express that out loud? And if so, how is that received? I'm dying to know.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it was just an inner knowing and intuitive feeling. Now that I've really embraced it, I've come to recognize that it is when I feel someone's very close to what I call the veil of crossing over into spirit form, because it's a little bit different. At least this is just how spirits show up for me. They show up in a way that is still, depending on who I would be doing a reading for, still that personality or little things that are very like inside jokes, very personable to that relationship and that personality when they were in human form. But there's also an integration of things that they've learned. And so that's the shift, I think, that I start to feel right before somebody passes. And then it's like like their spirits felt, but in a different way. And since then, I've recognized certain things that happen in my body. I get like super restless legs when I feel a spirit nearby. I'll get little like tingles on the back of my neck. So I've started to recognize those things as knowing that. And then your second question, I never really said it out loud. I'm trying to remember. I think if I did, it was brushed off because it would just be, oh, I think so and so is going, it's their time soon. But yeah, I think again, because I assumed everybody felt that, that I
Right.
didn't really say it out loud. It was kind of like an unspoken, oh yeah, I'm sure everyone feels that kind of thing or feels that their spirits of their ancestors close by. So,
Yeah, I made that mistake when I was a child. And so when you brought that up, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to ask her because that is exactly what happened to me is I knew a neighbor was going to pass the day before
mhm.
and I considered her like a grandmother figure. And so I thought everybody knew it. So I said, well, why can't I go over there? She's going to pass away tonight. And it was, I should have never said that. So I had to ask you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard when people don't understand, especially as a child. I'm sorry that you had that invalidating experience. I think for me, it was a lot of self-invalidation than outwardly. Both are not super great.
You mentioned coincidences. I think you said you didn't necessarily believe in those. Could you speak to that a little more?
When I was raised Christian, it was always, oh, well, this is God or spirits or whatnot. And then I went through a period of time where I just slowly kind of separated myself from all religion and thought, oh, it's just coincidence that things are happening. But I find there are some things that happen that just cannot be explained through coincidence, that just feels way too connected to a thread that is hard for us humans to understand. So now I don't really believe that there is a coincidence when things do happen, that there is usually some message in there or some lesson that is a part of the stars aligning or however you want to say that.
So you said something super interesting to me about how the organized religion viewpoint of our getting intuitive hits or feeling connected, whether it's with somebody who's about to pass, somebody who has passed, that it's an external event. So that, for instance, you use the term Holy Spirit, who was in their viewpoint communicating with you. Do you think that's just a label, maybe, that you are communicating with something, whether it's holy or not, or spiritual? Or do you think that it's more higher self-centered? Are these all connected?
Oh, that is a big question. I have to see how I would answer that. Yeah, I would say so. Growing up Christian, it was, at least the way that it was presented to me, was very much this intangible, odd, like three entities merged into one. And the way that I have shifted away from that, and I feel more of that intuitiveness has been, I think, to still feel, I still talk about spirit, and I think there is an element of that that I know, I know there are Christian witches and there are folks who practice um, mediumship and other forms of intuitive practices that follow the Judeo Christian ways. And I think it's just different ways of looking at how that spirit connects or how something bigger connects. When I was young, I used to, and this one was shut down when I was young. I remember saying out loud, well, why can't all of the gods just, I like, they're all just sitting at a table and they're all friends. Like, why can't, because that's how it works. And my parents were like, that's not how it works. But in my head, it was so obvious that this is how it's so interconnected. And now in my personal practice, I do have deities that I work with and that I have asked for their guidance with some of the mediumship stuff that I do. And I think that I've learned through that, and I've learned through my own craft as well, that so much of this resides within, and it is coming from that higher self. It is coming from hearing something that is outside of this realm and yet so interconnected. A very both and. Hopefully that answered your question.
You said that you work with deities.
Mhm.
So, do you have a specific deity or a couple of them? And what kind of work do you do with them?
Yes, to all of it. Yeah, so I have my ancestry is very Germanic. So I have mostly German and Norwegian, and I grew up with a lot of the different Norwegian aspects. That was what was emphasized quite a bit to me, including a little bit of the language and all of that. And so that felt the most accessible when I was starting to tap into like what is deity and that there are options outside of a very singular monolithic entity. And so I started to look into some of more of like the Norse mythology and lore, which felt very deep within my knowing already, very ancestral already. It's interesting how, even though being raised Christian, when I look back on it, there were so many aspects of lore that were weaved in. The Norwegian side is on my mom's side, and I was from a young age told about trolls, and we had little what would you call it, like little figurines of trolls around our home, and the stories of them were very prominent. I remember my grandma and my great aunt on my dad's side, where we talked a lot about the fairies that would live outside. Like there were a lot of these things outside of it, so it felt like a thread that I could already pull on. So I dug a little bit more into those. I knew but resisted that Loki was hanging around for a while because they are being a non-binary human. They're a very gender fluid deity, and really, at least in my relationship with them, are kind of a deity for queerness in many different ways and chaos, which, as my intro cued, has just been a part of my life always. So suddenly that made a lot of sense. But it wasn't, I resisted it because there is a lot of negativity around Loki as well. So I didn't really start to practice or embrace working with them for a while. But then once I did, everything seemed to fit and flow. And that's when I found Sigyn, who is Loki's spouse. So I work with Sigyn as well. And she is like such a gentle goddess who I work with and has been helping a lot with like healing my inner child in many ways. And then through all of that lore, I learned I'm like, I'm good with two. But a third one was like, wait a second, I'm here too. So it's actually Hel, Loki's daughter. And so Hel is the one who has really supported me with my mediumship the most. She is the goddess of like the underworld and spirits and the dead. And so she shows up for me like a connection to almost like a gateway to spirits. And so I've learned a lot from her about boundaries with spirits because I learned that was something that I needed to do. And I have learned about protection. I have like protection magic, and I've learned a lot of really connecting with death in a way that I think many humans don't necessarily embrace or celebrate. And she's really shown me how death is not this scary thing, but this very peaceful, beautiful thing, even if it was a tragic or traumatic death. She's shown me the other side of the veil, how it is this really like supportive thing versus an ending, an absolute kind of thing. So that's the short gist of my work with the three deities I work with.
Could you speak to the boundaries with spirits that you briefly mentioned? I think that's a powerful topic that far too many people do not discuss, and I
Mhm.
personally have fallen victim to as well.
Yeah. So when I first started really accepting, I guess, and say, or embracing this ability to connect with spirits, it's like a floodgate opened, and it was as if I put a massive neon sign of open above me in the spirit realm. And they would just come in, and so they're like, oh, sweet, this is a channel. And so it was really overwhelming to be around people because I hadn't figured out how to shield myself or have those boundaries of protection to protect my energy and my time. There's also one way that I learned it. So one of Bex's ancestors is her gay uncle who she never had a chance to meet, and we've learned a lot through my mediumship about him that we've affirmed through conversations with extended family. And he is a fun, fun loving spirit, but he would like to show up at inopportune times in the bedroom. I was like, I don't think your niece really would appreciate this. And so he taught me very quickly that I needed to say, like, hey, I see that you have this need to communicate, but this is not the time to communicate with me. We will have to find another time later on. I promise I will connect with you later on.
We
So,
just had another guest talk about a powerful spell per se called What the Fuck? And the energy behind it was get out. And that's a what the fuck moment.
yeah, it was. I mean, we laugh about it now and everything. So that was another one that I had. This is again before I really understood it. I had gone to this conference, sort of parenting thing in North Carolina, and the location of it was on this really old home. And there were three spirits connected to the home that were very much felt. And another who became friend, another participant in this was actually staying in that house. Like there were couches and stuff that you could stay. Some people were staying in tents outside. We were at an Airbnb. And it was to the point that she couldn't really sleep. She had never really experienced this. So I was trying to connect. And I think, again, because it was so easy for them to come through, followed me to the Airbnb and just, again, showed up in the bedroom in like the middle of the night wanting to like chat. And my kids were there, and I had to really set the boundary of like, hey, we can connect tomorrow. Please don't wake up my child. Like, I don't mind that you're here with me, but I don't want my child to get freaked out. So, yeah, I've learned a little bit more of those boundaries. I've asked, working with Hal, I've learned she has an actual, like, in my mind's eye, has a gate where she keeps the spirits behind, and I will let her know when I'm open, and she will open the gate for the spirits to come forward. I've also done a lot of shielding work too, so that I know when I go into spaces where there are more people, I'm not going to be as sensitive to spirits that might be hanging around them. So, yeah, it's a continuous thing that I'm learning, just like I'm learning with humans, because boundaries are hard. So I feel like spirits are actually kind of teaching me how to hold boundaries with other humans as well.
I love that. I love the connection because at the end of the day, these spirits that you're communing with were people.
Mhm.
So maybe they were pushy in real life. Maybe the uncle had a cute sense of humor. or an inappropriate timing.
Yeah.
And he just continued on as the way he was. But I'm thinking like there's something, a big red light that goes off when you're in the bedroom, Ness.
Yes.
Here I am. That's super cute. So I love the way that you said that you were working with a deity, because I could so easily visualize that gate being closed, and then she kind of being your gatekeeper, really,
Hmm.
or teaching you
Yes.
how to be a gatekeeper for yourself too, and then kind of opening the gate when you're ready. And I think a lot of people don't know how to connect with deities, or if a deity is connecting with them, I guess is a better thing. But before I go into that, I think it's important to ask you how you ended up in the witchcraft path after the way you were raised in Wisconsin. I'm wondering if your family said that just seems like a natural progression that they would continue on in their spiritual pursuits. What even brought you to witchcraft, and how does your family feel about that?
Well, my family does not know that I'm a witch.
So they
So
feel fine about it.
they feel fine about it. Yes. Although I did recently, I guess it would be like come out to my mom as a medium, which she interestingly like embraces, and it's not surprising to her. That was a really interesting conversation that happened. But in terms of how I arrived at witchcraft, I feel it was honestly similar to how I arrived with embracing my queerness. It's a very like windy path to arrival. And so there are some things that I think were already there than when I was a teenager. And as a child, I was a really avid reader. As an introvert, my ideal weekend as a teen was to hide out in my room in my cozy chair in my room with a good book and incense burning. And I read a lot of books around witches. A lot of them were fiction, or books with the main characters that had certain powers. And so I just found all of that extremely fascinating. I think the natural progression happened then when I got into yoga and I did my yoga training and I really started to learn how to meditate. And I was interested and looking into some other world religions. I'll call myself in because I think some of it was appropriative in that I wasn't aware as a white presenting human that I was taking on and trying on these various religions. Probably because it was more appropriating, it never stuck. It never really felt that it stuck. So I just, the last 10 years, I would just say I was spiritual, but I didn't have any. I guess some people would say that as like agnostic or whatnot. I never said I was fully atheist. I was just connected to a general spirit, or I would say, the universe, all of that sort of stuff. Which again, that's looking at it more from a religion, but which witchcraft is not necessarily that. But then how I arrived, I think I was already doing something and didn't even really recognize it. So I loved to work with different herbs. When I got into birth work, also was how it really deep dove me into that. My midwife is a witch. And so I learned a lot through her and used a lot of herbal remedies and tapped into some of that essence with myself and my kids as well. And I always feel like I need to be 100% clear too. We also like believe in vaccines and do all of that stuff too. It just felt very natural to me to like turn to like making elderberry syrup and that sort of stuff every fall. And then I started having some conversations with friends. I went on a more like decolonization journey that I'm still on because I feel like it's lifelong. And learned a lot of how to kind of tap back into that intuitiveness and piecing out different ways of practicing that felt like it was starting to lean towards that witchiness more and more. And so during that time, which started with the beginning of the pandemic, I had like my first tarot read and I found that really fascinating. So I got my first deck and I started doing that more. Oddly enough, I'd always had in my adult life an altar space that just felt really normal or part of life to have because that's where I would sit and meditate, to have a designated spot. So yeah, and then it was really a co-op I was part of. I learned of a friend's mother of one of my kids who is a witch and got a little bit more into it and I was like, "Oh, this is really amazing." Like I thought I was doing some of this stuff just for fun, but there's a word for this that I practice. Like I do tarot readings for people sometimes, and it's like I pull oracle cards and I sit and meditate and I do all of these things, and I know that I'll grab the nettle when somebody's sick and make nettle tea, like all of this stuff. And I thought, oh, there's actually words for this. So that's what landed me into witchcraft.
I appreciate you sharing that so deeply because my personal journey has been very much oh, in hindsight, it was this. Oh, in hindsight, it was that. And so, I definitely, going back to what you're speaking of, have had the conversation of deity work with many of my friends. And I'm like, I just don't know if I'm there yet. But then I have these moments where I'm like, oh, I know I'm working with at least two deities. I feel them deeply because that's my clair is just knowing,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't mean I really know what the hell is actually going on. I'm just following this intuitional path. And then later on, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's what it was. Yes.
Yes, that hindsight is so
Yeah.
accurate and like a light bulb moment. Yeah.
Based on what Chloe shared, that claircognizance that she has when you were working with Loki's daughter, you said?
Yes, with Hell as Loki's
Hell,
daughter.
yes.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, that's a tough name, but the just probably spelled a little differently. But with
Just one
working
less
with
L.
what's that?
It's just one less L.
Yeah, quite fitting in this conversation. But yeah, so when you're working with Hell, or as we were talking about Hell contacting you, did you also have claircognizance? Was it just, I know you had looked into the lore of Norse mythology and deity work, but was it kind of like, oh, this energy feels different. I know it's X, or I know it's Y? Or was it more of a conversation that you had? Hey, who exactly are you and what are you doing here? How was that communication to you? Because a lot of people search for deities that as I had mentioned, and they could be speaking to them and they not even know it.
That's a good question. I think it varies for each person, but it was very much like Chloe said, a deep knowing and then different signs that would pop up. So really, I think Loki was in typical Loki fashion with chaos, was the catalyst to find the other deities that I work with. But for them, it was just their name would pop up all over the place, or little like symbols that I have since learned are associated with them. I also thought it was very stereotypical. I'm like, well, every queer person works with Loki. I don't, it seems like I don't know if I want to, but I was at my high priestess's house, and one of her former cats' name was Loki, and she has their ashes. And we were having a conversation about deity, and I happened to look over and see Loki. And right there. And then the person that I was carpooling with to her house dropped me off and was listening to a book, Intuitive Witchcraft, and they immediately texted me because as soon as they dropped me off, they played the audiobook and it started the chapter on trickster gods. And so there are just all of these sort of things that would pop up that I would notice. So those kinds of, sometimes it's a color that will like present itself a lot, or a particular plant or animal that's associated, or bird that's associated with the deity, that when you start to really look at things, you notice a pattern of that popping up. But that's how Loki kind of barged their way into my life. And then I had just this knowing of other energies. I knew there was another deity around, and I kind of looked at, I knew it was a goddess. I knew it was a lot more gendered in that way. And so I looked at the different goddesses, and there would just be a knowing. I would read about Freya or Frigg, and I would read about them like they sound really cool. I love their lore. I just don't feel like a deep knowing, intuitive connection. And then when I read more about Sigyn and her, she has a very different energy in the way that she presents to me than Loki. And so I would feel that energy near, a lot more steadfast, but yet quiet. And then same with Hal, it just felt like another energy was around. And then she just started to pop up in oracle decks that I have, or just a lot of different representations of death, or I would have conversations with other people who work with her and that I didn't even know that they worked with her, and stuff like that that would just kind of present itself.
I like that. It's really saying to anyone who's wondering if a deity's searching for them to, number one, look for even what you might think is a small detail
Mm-hmm.
and start noticing coincidences, because maybe there are no coincidences, number one. And then number two, okay, why does this keep popping up? And what could this possibly mean to me, especially at the time period that they're popping up?
Mm-hmm.
And then thinking about that knowingness that you have when you said that certain deities that you would think about, you felt a deeper connection with than others, then maybe that's a good pathway for others who are searching or are wondering if they're being sought could connect. I wanted to ask you about the queer community acceptance in witchcraft. We all know Judeo-Christian churches, some are more open than others with
Mm-hmm.
gender fluidity, non-binariness, and they, for some reason, seem to care who we love. And I'm just wondering if that was also another reason that witchcraft may have attracted you, and then how you found that community, because just like Judeo-Christian churches and synagogues, temples, they all can be different. So I know coven by coven can be different as well. So I'm wondering if you could talk to whether you felt accepted, you're still shopping around. A certain lineages speak to you more than others. I love when you said Loki felt very gender fluid to you. It was much more of a gender fluid entity. So yeah, just wanted to get your thoughts on that as something that's so integral to your life.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I feel as if there are a lot of things that overlap when you look at the queer community. So just as when we look at neurodivergent, there have been studies that show that most queer people are neurodiverse or vice versa. So they've actually seen that. So I feel a lot of overlap. So I have come to know a lot of queer folks who are into witchcraft, and that's where I came across a lot of the different practices. That's where one of my friends who is in the local queer community was the one who invited me to the first trance work. It was with a hedge witch druid that she had brought into conversation. So that kind of stuff comes up quite often queer community because there's a certain level of acceptance that comes from more of the magical world. When we look at it, then you see in more of the other like Judeo-Christian spaces. However, that being said, I love your question because there are always places where that is not necessarily inclusive. So even in conversations about deity, for example, using just deity, which includes all entities, there was a lot of talk of like gods and goddesses, the divine masculine and the divine feminine, and just very like binary looking at things. So I feel as though I've come across it more from a gender aspect than I have from a sexuality aspect. A number of witches I know are queer, but not so much, or I haven't come across it more generically as those who are gender fluid. I have to really search for that specifically. And what helped me land in the coven that I am in currently is that there was a lot of intentionality behind specifically gender as well as sexuality, but with gender, looking at having the option of priest, priestess, priestess. When we have conversations about higher entities, having a broader deity conversation. When we look at things like energy, while sometimes we might use a more masculine energy, we look at more of the qualities and less the label of this equates masculine in quotations, or this equates feminine quotations. That's kind of what I have looked at, but I've found a number of, like my trans mentors that I have are witches, practice witchcraft, and it is a really healing place to land because it's not, in general, I think it's the humans that make it binary. I think in general, a lot of that is not binary in and of itself. So it feels like a very grounding, home-like feel for queer folks.
First, I need to say they ought to be damn ashamed of themselves. That is coming from a very trauma-based path. I can respect and understand the intent on trying to perhaps filter who's in your coven, but to add blanket labels with such ignorance is something I think we need to talk about more. Maybe that could be a whole nother episode. We do need to raise that awareness because if we as witches, when I say we, that's what I mean, if we are really embracing, perfect love and perfect trust and love and light, how dare we try to limit that for others, even with trying to understand and be trauma informed and give everybody that safe space. There's a much better way to filter than to blanket label and declare people good or not good or valid or not valid.
Right. Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah, I want to be super clear. It's not the coven that I'm in. They're amazing. It's more like other ones that I have come across. And that ties into like Loki, who is a very genderqueer deity. They shapeshift. They have birth as a birthing human and then have also switched back and forth between gender forms, between who their lovers are, all of that in the lore. A large group of like heathens, witches that gather where up until fairly recently, I want to say like 2019, that Loki's name was even allowed to be mentioned because they felt that they brought like too much chaos and that they were this chaos god and that it would bring in people that were other on the margins. They are a god who stands up for folks on the margins, part of what they're known for. And so, yeah, I think that really highlighted sometimes the unfortunate thing that really divides us versus magic, where I think in magic it's supposed to bring us together. And I feel like that can kind of fall into more of that spiritual bypassing of, oh, I'm like higher than you in some regard. And so I can determine who is worthy of being named and who is not. Yeah.
right? I'd like to believe it's definitely not from that platform of I am better for, but hopefully
Hmm.
it's from lack of knowledge. While maybe perhaps not trying to create such a toxic environment, they too are in feeding into that. So I love that this came up so that we can help bring more awareness.
Yeah. Thank you.
Right. If you're looking to be in a coven who only permits females and you're non-binary, are they going to ask you what you were assigned at birth? You know what I mean? Like it just
Hmm.
seems counterintuitive for a group of people who are being marginalized to then further marginalize. I remember having this conversation with somebody who I thought was super spiritual, and I was meaning outside of the norm, the accepted traditional religions. And I remember having a conversation about how our souls are probably both or genderless. We're just
Hmm.
full, we're just whole. There's no need to be anything in particular because we're not propagating. There's no reproduction, right? I mean, that's to me where humans are either labeled or assigned, and also that flows into, religious continuing to build the community, congregation, that type of thing. And I just remember this individual fully saying, and it was a male, so there was a little bit of emasculation, I think he may have felt when I made that statement. He's like, oh, no, my soul is male. And I said, how do you know that? I just know. And I thought, but I just know that mine's neither or
Hmm.
both, or maybe there's more than two. I don't know. Maybe just on this earth plane, there's two. And then we're
Hmm.
either both or none. But it was amazing. I just never thought we were gonna have a slap down over whose soul is what gender. We have so many other things to worry about.
Exactly.
So I appreciate your sharing that with us. Also, I had no idea about the percentages of neurodivergence and how that related to queerness. We're all connected. Everything's connected. I
Hmm.
don't know why I'm surprised or find that interesting. I should have just known that. This brings me to a question that you and I had actually done a little work with. You had had some visions of a past life where you believed you were a witch that had been betrayed by someone either in the coven, in the community, and in the past life. And that eventually got you hanged, which was obviously tragic ending for you. And I wondered if you could speak to mediumship, past lives, and how you think they're connected, and how you came to have such a clear vision or experience of knowing that you had been hanged in the past.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's like that's a deep question. So I have always been someone who had fall deep into meditation. And I when I was a child, I did hypnosis for the SATs. um,
Did it
so
work?
it did work a little bit. Yeah, it
Right on.
was. Yeah. So, and I was surprised. My parents like, which is that? I guess with the word or the way of saying that is that I'm very sensitive to kind of dropping into that space.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I think with that, the more that I have been more intentional with tapping into that space, the more I can connect. The more I can connect to those visions and recognize, oh, this is a thing. Again, it was something that came up. I just sort of had a feeling, and then in a really, really deep meditation where I was actually communing with my grandmother. So I have learned through mediumship that my grandmother was a witch, but nobody knew that she was a witch. And there's so many things again that I look back on and I was like, oh, that makes a lot more sense. And so in communing with her, it was on a new moon and I was having a hard day and my wife said, go like in the meditation room, go sit down and meditate. So I did. And I really connected with her. She gave me my witch name during that time that I connected with her. Just a lot of really beautiful connection. And I was struggling with joining a coven and whether I should or not. And I didn't know where that inner turmoil was coming from. And so it was during that time of connecting with her that she revealed that there had been a betrayal in the past within a coven. And so that's where I could see that. And I also, in learning about, witch hunts and all of that, I never got the sense that there was, or I never connected with the whole, burning at the stake, that unfortunately a lot of witches were persecuted in that way. I did a past life regression with you that we learned part of the reason was from another past life as well. But ever since I was a child, I just could not stand like turtlenecks around my neck. Grew up in like the 90s when you'd have those like chokers or whatnot. And I would put them on because, it was the cool thing to do, but take them off like as soon as I could because it felt so deeply uncomfortable. So there was just a sense that had been something in my past that I was able to reconnect and visit with and kind of heal some of that.
Have you had any clarity in addition to your mediumship with dreams or maybe deja vu, as I spent, I think, 20 years mislabeling deja vu as just the psychic knowing. So how have dreams, if at all, helped interpret this beautiful skill set that you embrace?
I've always had really, really vivid dreams. Something else that I didn't recognize until meeting both of my partners who do not. And I was like, you don't dream? Like I can recount things as if it's a movie. I've had both of them wake me up at certain points because I also will talk in my sleep. I have had dreams where they were concerned because of the way I was sounding, because there might have been something distressing happening. And I can recount exactly what was happening when they relate to me, what I was saying, or like the tone of it if they couldn't make it out. So, yeah, I feel for sure there's a lot that comes through dreams. One of my most fascinating mediumship moments was through this dream. I had a kind of recurring dream, but then a very, very vivid dream of this, like me and my kids were in my old elementary school and we went to go to the library, which was one of my favorite places in that elementary school. And it was like recovering a memory that I had in that dream because when I went into the library, I had a conversation with this little girl who like tapped me on the shoulder and was looking for a book on ballerinas. And I remembered having this conversation, like no one else could see her or hear her. And I woke up and it was super clear to me that this was a spirit that I had connected with when I was a child. I started to have this knowing, and through meditations, she came through more to the point that I got her name. I knew her name. I knew the date of her death. I knew how she died. She died of pneumonia. It was 1925, I believe it was. And so my wife has kind of become my like researcher when I have these ones where I'm like, okay, I'm having this spirit. Like, can we dig a little bit? And she looked into like death records and all that and found exactly that she was 9 years old and she would have lived close to the elementary school that I went to. And yeah, everything. And she died of pneumonia. And that's an example of how that came through a dream, but then continued as I like pulled on that thread that was through the dream.
Do you journal at all? And does that help?
Yeah, so I am ADHD, and so the ADHD part of my brain struggles with keeping a journal. So I'll be really good at it for a little while, and then it will sit for the longest time. So I do try to journal when it's something like that, though, to just like jot stuff down that I feel like is important. But I do need to get into the better habit of having the journal like right by the bed to make sure that I'm writing that down with dreams and things like that.
What I wonder is, as a medium, if we use that little girl as an example,
Hmm.
being that you believe in past lives, if you've met, for instance, that little girl and then another time that that soul also lived. So several iterations of the same soul, but in
Yeah.
different lifetimes.
Yeah. So meeting it in different forms of the soul. That's a good question. I have to think about. I mean, I know that's the case for my grandmother. I've felt that there have been different iterations that she's come through.
So, for
Um,
instance, when she was a witch, that you felt was a different lifetime.
I felt that she was a witch in the lifetime that I knew her, but
Oh,
she had also been a witch that was a part of that coven that we were betrayed, but we were not related, if that makes sense.
right. You weren't
Yeah.
related, but you recognized
Yes.
that that was the soul that now was your grandmother who is now passed. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a perfect example. I wondered because sometimes people, when I'm regressing them, will say, "I feel like that person, even though looks nothing like X, Y, or
Mhm.
Z, is my spouse or is my child or is my horse or whatever." Like there's just something, and it's kind of like when we dream, it's like, I know you didn't look like this, and I know you didn't talk like this, and blah blah, but I know it was you.
Yes.
You know, that just knowingness. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's super cool.
Yeah.
I just think that's amazing when you start unpacking these things, how time really is, or at least our perception, once we break it down, it really is a spiral.
Yes. Very much so. Very much so. A spiral. Yeah.
A few more questions if we
Yeah.
can.
Yes,
This is just
absolutely.
so,
Go for it.
okay, great. This is just so fascinating talking to someone who has just so many different tentacles in different areas of life, being a mom, being in the LGBTQ community, recognizing yourself as a witch and also a musician. So there's just so many things to unpack. I'm wondering if being an artist has an impact on your spirituality, whether it's through witchcraft or just your connection with ancestors, mediumship.
Yeah, I love that. My music, I feel, connects so many of those things and yet doesn't. So I'm going to have a really complex answer to this, I think. I think music for me was a container to express that and tap into it. So there's a term that we use in music called a state of flow. And when you get into this state of flow, it's very much similar to a state of meditation that you're in. And so when I would be performing or I would be playing, and there would be a certain piece of music that would just speak to me on a soul level, often I could easily tap into that state of flow where it's like everything falls into the distance, into the background, like sense of time. If I were up on a stage playing, it was like I wasn't even aware of the other people around me, and could really emote through the music and let that kind of flow out of me. And it was also a catalyst, a way for me to be in touch with my emotions as well. Music is such a powerful force, and that I think we all connect with, and it is a way that can easily connect us to spirit. For example, the when I shared that I had played for my grandmother right before she passed, that piece I will always think of her. Like her spirit will always come through that piece, because it just feels like such a connection in that way. My husband, he plays horn, tragically lost someone when we were both in college, a classmate. And there was a piece that he was playing at the time when he got word that she had passed. And to this day, he still cannot listen to that piece because it is so deeply connected to that loss. And so I think that we also like imprint that connection to people's spirits through music. And it's another way that they kind of continue to live.
But it's not lost on us that you play the harp.
Yeah.
That's very angelic thinking and very ethereal. So you could have picked any string instrument.
You took the words right out of my mouth. Exactly what I was thinking. This whole time I've been biting my tongue to die. I've just been dying to ask the most ethereal, like just beautiful, angelic sounds.
I feel I shared this story so many times because that's a question I get a lot. Like, why the harp? How did you arrive at the harp? So I started with piano when I was very, very young. I think I was about 4 or 5. And then there's the typical music programs in public schools where you get to pick an instrument out. And I had picked violin and I was horrible at it. But we had our little orchestra pieced together of all of us who really had no idea what they were doing and playing together. And there was a classmate of mine who had just started harp, and so she brought her harp in one time, and I was just so enamored with it. And I begged my parents to play this. It's like I knew I had to play this instrument. And maybe it's the Scorpio and me. I'm pretty stubborn and persistent. So they thought I would let it go, but I continued to ask for 3 years. And finally, they're like, okay, they're not giving up on this. So finally, then when I was in 6th grade, around the actually 12 was a really like prominent age for me. So that it was right around the time that my great aunt passed was when I started harp as well, which was also the time, I mean, we talk about all this stuff, this time that my cycle started. Like there's just so much that went around that age. And the harp, the way the music is read, looks almost identical to piano music. It has like 2 stabs. So it was a very smooth transition for me to go from reading piano music to reading harp music. And I've found in my teaching as well that students often pick it up a lot quicker if they've had that experience of piano where they have read music quite similar to it. So yeah, that's how I landed in harp. And then I just continued. I have 2 degrees in it and yeah, play all over.
Can you teach me how to play remote through the Zooms?
Sure, I can. I have done that. I had to learn how to do that during the pandemic.
I
Yeah.
didn't even know how much I wanted to play until talking to you. That's so cool. You inspire me so much. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
My last request is if you could leave us with a short affirmation that would give people empowerment.
Yeah. The biggest thing is you're a lot more powerful than you think. A lot more powerful than you think.
I love that. Thank you so much, Naz. I have really, really enjoyed this discussion.
Thank you. Me too. I could talk to the two of you all day.
Yeah,
I
don't.
absolutely loved having you here. How could we reach out to you? How can our listeners find you? Do you offer any services?
I am slowly but surely opening up to do more readings and such for people. So I have done mostly like within a coven, close friends of mine, that sort of thing, but I am open to it.
If anyone is interested in having a reading with Ness, feel free to reach out to us and we will make sure that a connection is made. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you both.
It was such a wonderful, wonderful experience having you with us. Thank you again.
Thank you for joining the Mystical Mermaid Lounge podcast.
Constructive and positive feedback are always welcome. Drop us some fan mail on mysticalmermaidlounge@buzzsprout.com or email us directly mysticalmermaidlounge@yahoo.com. Finally, if you are as passionate as we are about educating and supporting spiritual seekers who are also on a magical journey of divine self-discovery, then we would greatly appreciate your cup of coffee donation. Please brew some joe and pour us a cup at buymeacoffee.com/Mystical Mermaid Lounge. Catch us again at the next high tide.